Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the NFL Today, the USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. And this is episode 364. It is the sixth and final installment of our Arizona Cardinals 2022 opponent previews. In our previous five, we previewed the NFC West teams. We looked at, in two episodes, the AFC West opponents, and also in another two, the NFC South opponents, as the Cardinals play those two divisions entirely. The games left to preview are their three second-place schedule games. They will face the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 5 at home. They will face the Minnesota Vikings in Week 8 on the road. And as the 17th game matchup, they face the New England Patriots at home in December in a Monday night game. And so coming up in this edition, we've got interviews with the managing editors for Eagles Wire, Vikings Wire, and Patriots Wire. So that's coming up next, starting off with the Eagles. And to help us out, to get to know the Eagles a little bit better, talk about their offseason, last season, and the upcoming season, we've got, for the second time in 3 years as well, Glenn Irby from EaglesWire.com, our sister site from the USA Today NFL Wire. Glenn, welcome to the show again, and thank you for coming on. How has everything been going for you?
It's amazing, Jess. Having a great summer. I appreciate you having me on today, man. Thank you so much again.
All right, so let's look back at the last season. So in 2021, the Eagles had an up and down season. They were really good and sometimes puzzlingly not great. They finished 9-8. They missed the postseason, and so tell us what were the highs? What went well for the Eagles last year? What didn't go well for the Eagles last year? Kind of take us through last season a bit.
Well, I think you had your highs and your lows. I think you had a situation where they started the season with a monster schedule. So at that point, you were just hoping to go 2-4, get through that rough patch. So you had a situation where Jalen Hurts had his first season as a starter. He improved, led the team in rushing. Devontae Smith broke Deshaun Jackson's rookie record in receiving. So from an offensive standpoint, they improved. They led the NFL in rushing, had the number one offensive line. So from that standpoint, things looked up. Dallas got his first chance after Zach Ertz was traded to you guys. We'll discuss that later, to be the main tight end here in Philadelphia. So everything from an offensive standpoint was about improving and taking steps. On defense, you had Jonathan Gannon's first season as a defensive coordinator. So you had a situation where the guys were learning the new defense. Thankfully, towards the middle to the end of the year, things got better. They played against, lesser competition at the quarterback level, and that allowed the team to finish at 9-8 on the year. So there are some good things. Nick Sirianni showed that he could be a solid head coach in his rookie season. Jonathan Gannon's a solid defensive coordinator. So the building blocks are there to go forward in 2022.
Okay, so let's talk specifically about Sirianni. When he was hired, what was sort of the feeling around him? Because if I recall, his intro presser was an interesting one. But did he exceed expectations or kind of meet them right where everyone kind of hoped that the Eagles would be for this season?
I think he exceeded. I mean, it's maybe a little bit of both. I think you have a situation, like you said, that first press conference, you had people he's not a Bill Belichick type of guy. He's a younger guy. He's a football guy. So from that standpoint, he didn't sound like your typical coach, but whatever he did, he got the guys to buy in. He talked about planting seeds, flowers, all those different type of things that you might think might be corny, but they bought in every week. So I think from the standpoint of his team buying in, team building, X's and O's, he has it all. I think it's just about him getting the proper experience, learning on the job, learning to delegate, which he did. He handed over the play calling duties to Shane Steichen and never took them back. So he took great strides in his first year. He's a good ball coach, as he likes to say.
Now, the Eagles had kind of the opposite season that the Cardinals did. The Cardinals started super hot, and
Right.
they faltered down the stretch, and there were lots of reasons for that. But Philly, in turn, they went 2-5 to start the year. They were 5-7, and then won 4 in a row before losing the regular season finale to the Cowboys. That was, I'm sure you'd probably not want to recall that game because that was a bad game, and then losing in the first round to the Buccaneers. Not that you could have expected to beat the Buccaneers in the playoffs. Would you say that overall the season, like you said, the Sirianni met expectations? Were Eagles fans expecting reasonably? Like, of course, Eagles fans would. That everyone wants the postseason, everyone wants the playoffs, wants a Super Bowl. But was it reasonable to expect or hope the Eagles to make the postseason last year, even as a one and done? But would you say the last season was a success?
For sure, for sure. I mean, I think they were a year ahead of schedule, so you would have expected for 2022 to maybe be the year that they returned. So the fact that they returned to the postseason put them, ahead of schedule. I think Hurts, making progress during the season, playing good games when he needed to, you know, that was a positive. I think the 9-8 records you'll have your pockets of fans that said 9 wins was great. You'll have your pockets of fans that said they expected the team only to win 6 games. But you'll have your pockets of fans that hint to that last game and the 17 and the extra playoff team, and they're not really a playoff team. So those are just Eagles fans. But I think from a standpoint of team building, retooling your roster while staying competitive, which Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, were focused on, I think they succeeded in that manner. So you got to the playoffs, you got your quarterback a postseason game, and you were able to do that without sacrificing picks or any huge paydays.
Let's talk about Jalen Hurts,
Okay,
a polarizing player for a lot of
always
people.
daily.
And one thing that he's proven is that he is capable to be in the NFL. He's definitely capable of being an NFL quarterback. The question is this: do you think that he is the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles' future, a franchise level quarterback? Say, let's go back to, is he the guy like Donovan McNabb? I'm not saying he's at the same level of him or they're going to have the same type of success, but can you ride with Jalen Hurts moving forward as your starting quarterback? Do you think he's shown enough progress, and do you think that's going to improve in 2022?
I think so. I mean, he's gotten better each year he's been in the NFL. And I think, the one thing that he's doing this offseason that he's never had the chance to do since going back to high school was be in the same system, prepare with the same coaches. So you'll have a situation where he's not losing a coordinator or a head coach or anything like that. So the second year in the system, he should take huge steps. I think he took huge steps as a passer. Of course, he's a runner. They got A.J. Brown. They got, so you have a situation where you're throwing the ball to Devontae Smith, you're throwing the ball to your best friend Dallas Goedert. So I believe it'll be a situation where McNabb had to do a lot with less, and Hurts will now be in a situation where he'll be able to do more because he has more around him. So there's no excuse for him not to take the next step. I think you'll have a situation where the team believes in him, the team rallies around him. He just needs to take the next step as a passer in terms of accuracy, being on time with his throws, and retooling his release. Three things that I think he did this offseason, and teammates have spoken about it, day after day. So I think he can. He won't be your Justin Herbert. He won't even be your Josh Allen. But in terms of taking the next step in his third year as a starter, improving, being able to win you a playoff game, I think so, yes.
It's interesting to me because I know he doesn't have all the tools that some of these other quarterbacks have. He reminds me in many ways, and I think Vince Young was probably a little bit early for the NFL.
Right.
I see him kind of as a Vince Young type impact player who is a win. He's a winner. Doesn't have all the quarterback tools necessarily, but has great leadership. So I would say this: were there really some issues within the locker room with Carson Wentz, or is just Hurts that much easier to follow as a teammate, from what you understand?
I think a little bit of both. I think he's that much easier to follow. I think he's more outgoing, more engageable. It's all those intangibles you're talking about. I think, Carson Wentz shows that you could still be a good guy and technically and still have problems in your locker room. Excuse me. So I think it was a situation where he's not the rah rah type. He's not a guy that's going to hang out in terms of Wentz and things like that. So he was a little bit ostracized at times. I think Hurts knows all the right things to say. He buys in. I think this stems back to his prep career going to Alabama. So you have the different trajectories that they took getting to their situations. You have Carson Wentz, the number 2 pick. You have Hurts, someone who's at this, I guess, essentially be an underdog his whole career. And guys respect that. They respect the plays. They respect his hard work. So those intangibles help him galvanize the locker room. They help him carry. So now at this point, all he has to do is make the throws, make the correct decisions, and he'll be fine.
Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the off season that the Eagles had, an eventful one. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Eagles, like the Cardinals, made a splash move during the draft, trading away their first-round pick for a player. The big move was obviously the trade for A.J. Brown. What does that move do for the offense? One thing it does, I know that's one thing that they're doing is that the Eagles are making it clear they're going to put Hurts in a situation to be able to succeed. So now you've got Devontae Smith, you've got A.J. Brown. How do you see him fitting into this offense, and what do you think his impact will be?
I think he'll bring a more physical presence. I mean, not that Devontae Smith isn't physical, but you have a situation where he'll bring the type of energy, not to compare him because they're not the same people, but he'll bring a Deebo Samuel type energy to this offense. And I think you see a situation where, he's a natural alpha, a natural number one, a natural leader. So he'll bring physicality. He'll bring, the ability to be press coverage man to man. He'll bring the ability to take a short play or short pass and turn it into a large gain. He'll bring the ability for someone who can be on the same page with Hurts, and because of their friendship over the years, and allow that to trickle down to where Devontae Smith is now having success against the number 2 corner, Quez Watkins or Zach Pascal, or maybe even Jalen Reagor at times is having success against the team's 3rd corner, and all that trickles down to where Dallas Goedert has room in the middle to work. Miles Sanders has room to work in the running game. Kenneth Gainwell has room to work in the passing game on 3rd down. So I think you'll see Brown, as long as he can stay healthy, open up a lot of things.
They added Hassan Reddick, a guy that I'll tell you this. I heard that the Cardinals, basically the Eagles outbid the Cardinals. The Cardinals wanted to re-sign Reddick after his year in Carolina, and they offered him a little bit less. I heard it was about $12 million per year that they wanted to pay him. Philly got him for $15 per. But the difference being, even if the Cardinals had offered Hassan that contract at $15 per year, I doubt they would have gotten him, because the idea of being able to go back to Philadelphia, because he played at Temple. What impact do you see Reddick having on defense?
He's a weapon, and I think that's how he refers to himself when he's here. And so you'll have a situation where, as a Sam linebacker, he's Jonathan Gannon's dream. So, in the defensive scheme that he likes to prefer, it's hybrid. He'll play some 3-4, he'll play some 4-3. He might even play some 5-2. You'll have a situation where he now has a Sam linebacker that can rush the passer as a blitzer. He can rush the passer as a stand-up end. So you also have a situation where the Eagles can take Reddick and place him as a stand-up end, or in situations where things maybe aren't going right, you could take him and place him at defensive end. But you have a situation where a team that likes to pressure the quarterback now has a guy that actually finishes those pressures off with sacks and big plays.
I think you got him for a nice, was it 3 years, 45 that they got it?
Correct.
3 years is kind of perfect, because he is undersized. I will say this about Hassan Reddick, and that's the one thing that you always worry about with someone who, because his trait is elite get off the line of scrimmage. At 6'1", 235, if he loses that at all, he'll become a much different it'll become much more difficult for him to rush the passer. But
Correct.
at his age, 3 years, the Eagles got a really, really good player at a really good price.
I think so.
Kaiser White, Rennell Wren, and also Zach Pasco. What additions are those? Are these all three guys that are going to start, and what will their role be in the Eagles' offense and defense?
I think White has the chance to start at the will linebacker to be a situation depending on how Davion Taylor returns from his injury and how Nakobe Dean looks early on. And as you know, whether he's playing middle linebacker or will, that'll be determined. So White played middle linebacker for the Chargers last year. The Eagles got an up close and personal look at him. Very fast guy, plays safety at West Virginia. So you have a situation where you might have interchanging linebackers, but during OTAs and offseason work, he started at outside linebacker at the will. Ren's the defensive tackle, should make the roster, should replace Hassan Reddick, and it'll be a situation where with Jordan Davis and other guys, he just plugs that rotation of defensive tackles up front behind Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave. Prior to A.J. Brown, Pascal was a definite starter, likely in the slot or to third wide receiver. He'll still probably see significant snaps, but in terms of starting, you'll likely see Brown, Devontae Smith, and Quez Watkins. So all three players will have roles. It'll just be about how many snaps they get, and that's usually how the Eagles play that out on defense anyway. So in terms of that defensive tackle role, that will linebacker role, it was going to be based off of snaps anyway.
Did the Eagles lose anyone significantly in the offseason to trades, free agency, or whatnot?
No. I mean, you might have a situation where cornerback went to the Texans, but outside of that, they resigned most of their guys and still have. They allowed Nate Herbig to leave as a restricted free agent. They rescinded that deal. But besides that, they resigned Mailata, Dallas Goedert, Avonte Maddox, all the guys from 2018, and added Hassan Reddick and a few others. So it was a pretty solid offseason from Roseman from that standpoint, and also shows you the lack of star power or quality players that they had up for new contracts as well. So it's not the greatest thing. It's just a situation where they were able to retain their key players.
And then you go to the draft, and one, they managed to trade a pick for A.J. Brown and still get an impact defender. Jordan Davis, I had him pegged for the Ravens. I am 100% sure that the Ravens were going to draft him were it not for the Eagles trading up and leapfrogging them to land them. Now, Jordan Davis and Fletcher Cox on the defensive line, I think that's unfair. Don't you think that's unfair for opponents?
I think so. I think you have a situation where Davis doesn't have the pressure that most first-round picks will have, but he'll still have the impact. You'll have situations where he might be in the middle by himself in a 3-4 look, or he'll be rotating behind Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave in a 4-3 look. So you have a situation where the Eagles defensive tackles, especially Cox, get some limited snaps, so they're able to limit his snaps while increasing his production. And you have a situation where, first off of what we've seen during the offseason workouts, Davis is going to line up all up and down the defensive line. He's athletic. He's fast. He's lost some weight. Yes, and he's lost some weight.
What's he probably going to play at, you think?
I expect him to play around 360, but he's looking lean. He's looking light. So from that standpoint, he's cut about 10 pounds, but he's still going to play at about his 340, 360 range.
Oh my gosh! And leading up to the draft, so my co-host for this show, he also has a podcast of his own called the Original Draft Breakdown Podcast, and they covered the draft. And the one thing, like player comps, there literally is no player comp for Jordan Davis. Basically the closest comp for him was a grizzly bear. The way his size, his movement, his speed, his athleticism. Basically, you guys got a grizzly bear, and he sets the bar because he's not like anyone we've ever seen. You guys got a couple of other players that were intriguing too, because in round 2, I happen to kind of know this. The Cardinals wanted the guy you all drafted in the second round, Cam Jurgens, center out of Nebraska. He was Now the Cardinals landed up with Trey McBride, the tight end, and they're very, very happy. But they had their eye on 2 players, and Jurgens was the other one. And I think had both been on the board, Jurgens would have been the pick. Is Jurgens going to play right away this year, or is it going to be a redshirt year to then move into 2023?
I think it really depends on the depth, whether any injuries happen during training camp, and how he pans out just in terms of training camp practices. So from the understanding I've got, even though he's penciled in as Kelsey's replacement at center, it's a situation where he's talented and versatile enough to play guard. And you could see situations where, depending on what happens with Isaac Sumalo or Jack Driscoll, where he might get an opportunity to get reps at either guard spot. So you'll either see him play guard, or you'll see him get a redshirt season where he learns and prepares behind Kelsey.
Round 3, Nakobe Dean, a guy that many guys had as a first-round pick. I know that the medicals were an issue for him, but getting him in the third round, the Eagles have kind of been looking for a big-time linebacker for some time.
Correct.
You'd almost want to say since they let Jordan Hicks go, but there's a reason why you let Jordan Hicks go. That he'd missed a lot of time, and he had a nice time in Arizona, but what is Dean's role going to be? Is he healthy, and is he going to be able to be the guy like he was at Georgia?
In terms of health, we've heard nothing to suggest that he's not. We've heard nothing about surgeries or any rehabilitation. He was on the field for offseason workouts and OTAs after the draft. If you hear things about him being a defensive play caller, and getting that helmet with the green button, the green dot. So does that mean he'll start? We don't know, but that means Jonathan Gannon thinks highly of him. He thinks highly of his intelligence. You have a guy who has high IQ, architectural degree, can run sideline to sideline, anticipates plays. So you'll have a situation where TJ Edwards and other guys are going to have to hold him off, rather it be about him earning his playing time.
And then your last 2 picks were Kyron Johnson out of Kansas, Grant Calcaterra out of SMU. Do either of those have a significant role this coming season? Do they view Calcaterra as someone that can complement Goddard, or is he are as 6th-round picks usually are they more hopeful developmental situations?
I think a little bit of both. I think Johnson's an athletic pass rusher, a lighter Reddick, and call it that, a poor man's version of that. So you'll see situations where he'll get the rush from a Sam linebacker position while Reddick is rushing off the edge. So he'll be included in the mix. He'll also get a chance to make plays on special teams. Calcaterra is a player to watch because if not for the concussions he suffered in college, he might have been a higher draft pick. He's an excellent pass catcher, someone that reminds you. I've heard people talk about him in terms of a younger Zach Ertz, in terms of his physical build and his abilities. He actually spent 1 year playing with Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma and catching passes from him. So they'll have instant chemistry there. So Calcaterra is probably the player to watch in terms of a 6th-rounder who'll get to be on the field with Goddard and maybe, make plays as a rookie.
Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's round this out with the upcoming season, expectations and hopes for the Eagles. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, best of Cardinals Talk on the Web, and we're going to look ahead with Glenn Irby from Eagles Wire, from the Eagles Wire, from the USA Today NFL Wire. Looking ahead to 2022. What are reasonable expectations for what the Eagles season could be? Do you think that they have enough to overtake the Cowboys as kind of the favorite to win the division?
I think so. I mean, I think a changing of the guard is expected. I think before they got Brown, they were even with the Cowboys because of the loss of Amari Cooper and others within their roster. The addition of Brown, the addition of Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, I think puts them over the top. I think a changing of the guard is going to happen. I think it'll all depend, of course, on guys staying healthy and Hurts taking those next steps as a passer. But I think the expectation is, even though they're maybe still a year away from being a team that you expect to make a deep playoff run, I think for Hurts, it's playoffs and a playoff win. So it can't be a regression. It can't be another 9-8 season. There are expectations. Anything less than 12-5, 11-6, there'll be discussions about what the Eagles might want to do at quarterback. But there are expectations. And after adding, guys like Reddick, adding A.J. Brown, the idea is that they should start the season off 4-0, 3-1 at minimum, and challenge the Cowboys for the division. Yes.
That would be I feel more or less that the last year's division winners are the favorites. I know that the Eagles are getting closer. That I think that they're of all the divisions in the NFC, I think the Eagles have the best chance to supplant last year's winner.
Okay.
With Cardinals, 49ers, Eagles, Saints, and Vikings as the 5 teams that I would expect to be battling for a wild card spot. I think the Cowboys, and that depends on the play of Prescott compared to the play of Hurts, in my opinion. But as we look ahead to that Week 5 matchup with the Eagles and Cardinals, obviously the Cardinals will still be without DeAndre Hopkins unless something changes. He's going to be suspended for the first 6 games. He's trying to get that reduced because he says he believes that there was a contamination issue with whatever. But we're not planning on it. How do the Eagles fans view that game against the Cardinals? Do they view it as a should win, toss up, or a one they could steal?
Because it's so early in the season, I have it as a loss for them. So basically, after the fast start and different things like that, I have a situation, and I think most fans is a situation where, you have them playing Monday night against the Vikings after opening up against the Lions. You'll have them playing Wentz for the first time. Then they'll play their old head coach and Doug Peterson, the Jaguars, and then the Cardinals are sitting there in Week 5, right in between the Week 6 matchup with the Cowboys. So it's like a hectic month right there emotionally after the first 2. So I have a situation, and I think other Eagles have it, other Eagles fans, media, and people like that have it as a situation where looking ahead to the Cowboys, there's an expectation that it's going to be a nice road trip for the fans in terms of weather, being in Arizona. But the expectation is that even without Hopkins, you guys always start the season off fast, always tough early on in the season. So the expectation is, okay, if you get the win there, great, but you could get the loss while looking ahead to the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football.
And I see this game as I think it's a game the Cardinals should win, but based on what we know about the two teams, I think I would consider a toss-up. I think I actually predicted this would be one of those games that they lose, because every year, there's home games that you should win that you don't, and I think the Eagles are going to be a tough opponent. It's going to be fun to watch. Obviously, there is some. I mean, it's not necessarily familiarity because they were together, but the fact that Hurts was Murray's successor at Oklahoma gives them a connection there as well. What would you say? So I know you say kind of expectations, kind of 10, 11, 12 wins. What do you think their floor is? Floor to ceiling, what do you think the Eagles are capable of? Kind of a bad case scenario and then best case.
Everything goes well, no major injuries. Hurts takes the next step as a passer. Ceiling is 13 wins without a doubt because of the addition. If the wheels fall off, everything goes bad. Gardner Minshew has to play, or Hurts forgets how to play the football game. 7-8 wins is the floor, and that's it. Like everything goes bad, 7-8 wins. I don't think they'll regress beyond the 9 that they had the year prior.
Completely reasonable. This should be a good game in Week 5. Should be a competitive season in the NFC with teams like with the Eagles and the Cardinals. And I like what the NFC is playing out, and even with. Which is funny because I know that there's a lot of optimism in Philadelphia right now. Here in Phoenix, there's a lot of pessimism because of how the season ended, and the fact that they mostly just brought back guys. The Cardinals had an 11-win team last year. I don't think they're going to be quite as dominant as they were early in the season, but I don't think they're as bad as they were. So I'm also expecting an 11-win season from Arizona and a wild card berth. I think that's reasonable, and then we just need to take the next step and actually win one, kind of like what y'all are thinking about. But
correct. Loaded division.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. That is Glenn Irby from the EaglesWire.com from the USA Today NFL Wire. You can find him, obviously, on the NFL Wire there on that site. Glenn, are you on social media at all?
Yes. You can find me on Twitter. Only Twitter. That's it. The Cover 2 NFL, EaglesWire.com. That's about it.
All right. Thank you for your time on the show, Glenn. And we will be back with another opponent preview coming up next. Thanks for listening.
Appreciate you having me on a Friday. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We move on to the next of the Cardinals' second-place games and have our opponent preview with and about the Minnesota Vikings. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, and we have the second of our second-place games for the Arizona Cardinals. They take on the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 5, as we talked with Glenn Irby from EaglesWire.com. Next up, we have Jordy McElroy from VikingsWire.com, as the Cardinals will be on the road to face the Vikings in Week 8, the second year in a row that they face each other. Jordy, welcome to the show. How have you been, man?
Man, I've been doing great, man. I think, me and you were kind of cutting it up earlier, talking about this brutal Tennessee heat out here, man. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, Cardinals fans will know all about brutal heat. It's like we'll get into arguments with which is worse. I don't know which is worse. I've lived in Phoenix all my life. 115-degree oven heat. It's hot, but it isn't humid. It's definitely a dry heat. I'm not sure which one I'd prefer more, but we did mention. There is no relief with the wind here in the Phoenix area because it is just like open the oven and have a fan blow on you with the oven air.
I would actually love to be in the Minnesota area right about now. Like, might have to go there a little early.
All right, so Jordy, thanks for coming on the show again. I know it took a while to get us to now. By the time this is published, most of the other shows were recorded a couple weeks ago. Jordy apparently his dentist tried to kill him a few times, but we got him on the show. He is alive. His mouth is all good, and we're here to talk about the Cardinals, a Week 8 opponent. Obviously, the Vikings fell short of the playoffs last year. We probably have Greg Joseph to thank for that a little bit. The Cardinals have Greg Joseph to thank for their Week 2 win, as he missed a potential game-winning field goal at the end of the game that gave them a 34-33 win in Week 2. But if you could just kind of recap for us last year. We know that they missed the playoffs. They've got some good, got some bad. What went well last year? What didn't go well? And how did the season go compared to what was expected out of them?
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say that the dentist almost killed me 10 times. I just got to throw that out there. It's an actual number. But yeah, what didn't go well for the Vikings? Well, pretty much almost everything. You bringing up the Cardinals game, I actually think that's a perfect starting point because that game was kind of a mirror of like the entire season, for the Vikings. They lost too many close games. I mean, seven out of 9 of their losses were by a touchdown or less. And it's just these heartbreaking defeats. And when they get in those tough situations, they couldn't close out games and they couldn't get those wins. Honestly, if you want to talk about what went well, you just kind of point to players like Justin Jefferson's amazing. And you're hoping for another third-year leap under Kevin O'Connell, which I'm sure we'll get to later on in the show. But, the defense, they struggled really bad. They had a lot of injuries. Danielle Hunter, very important key piece guy, he was out throughout the season. And, they couldn't put it together. So the main thing that went wrong for the Vikings last season was the fact that they couldn't close out games. And you're hoping that'll change this season.
So you look at kind of what happened. You dealt with, obviously, Justin Jefferson, fantastic. I mean, you look at what he's done so far in his career, and you've got a 1,600-yard campaign last season. You've got Dalvin Cook, one of the best running backs in the NFL. He had over 1,100 yards in 13 games. You get solid production out of Alexander Madison, and you have the, as you will hear it around, the enigmatic Kirk Cousins, who statistically proves every year that he belongs in the conversation of some of the top quarterbacks, but seems to lack something. What is the status of how Vikings fans feel about Kirk Cousins? He had another 4,000. He had over 4,200 passing yards his last season, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That's a fantastic season. But what is it about him that just makes it so people just they don't love him as a starting quarterback?
So if you were just to look at the numbers alone, I mean, and you were to consider Kirk Cousins a problem, quote unquote, that's a pretty good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
with stats like that. But for whatever reason, he's probably one of the more polarizing players in the entire NFL. And I think his contract has a lot to do with it. Actually, I did a piece not long ago, and I called Kirk Cousins the Michael Jordan of NFL contracts because this guy just knocks it out of the park every time he's at the negotiating table for guaranteed money. But at the end of the day, you know, when you're making elite money, but you're not giving the team elite production as far as he's not an Aaron Rodgers. He's not a Patrick Mahomes. You know, he's not a Tom Brady. So, you know, the perception for a team that hasn't been to the playoffs in back-to-back seasons, they start to grow a little tired of that. They're thinking, you know, maybe that money could be better allocated elsewhere in other positions of need for the team. But then again, you have to think, I did another piece, you know, the grass isn't always greener on the other side of a Kirk Cousins, who is a very, very good quarterback. You know, actually getting a lot of hate from Panthers fans because I use them as a comparison right now with them in the Sam Darnold situation and Baker Mayfield. You know, I'd rather have Kirk Cousins over both of those guys. But then again, you're hoping, back to what I said about the Justin Jefferson thing, you're hoping with a Kevin O'Connell coming in, things could possibly change for Kirk Cousins if the Vikings start winning football games.
So so they couldn't close out games. Was that more an offensive thing, a defensive thing, or special teams? If I'm kind of looking at their schedule last year, it felt to me, so the Cardinals in 2016, they ended up going 8-8. And it was a season when entering the year, they had Super Bowl expectations after the 13-3 campaign. And one thing they just couldn't do, they couldn't get over 500. They could never get over that hump. Special teams had a top 10 offense, top 10 defense, but their special teams was atrocious. It lost them, directly caused 4 or 5 losses in the game. You kind of look at offensively that the Vikings were fine offensively. You know, you look at Kirk Cousins' numbers, the passing game he has great passing numbers. You have an elite receiver in Justin Jefferson. You have an elite running back in Dalvin Cook. Defensively, they're 30th in yards allowed. They're 24th in points allowed. Was it more a defensive issue? Once again, which, you know, has this Vikings team has seemed to have gone to being the defense being their strength. Did it become a liability last year?
You know what, and I believe it did, but obviously as the quarterback, you get blamed for everything, or, you know, whether that's winning or losing. Quarterbacks just kind of typically take the blame, so I think that's where Kirk kind of fell in line there. But yeah, obviously the defense, they struggled. They couldn't stop the run. They couldn't stop the pass. I mean, teams were just taking whatever they wanted all over them. I called them the doormat defense last season because that's what they were, sadly. You know, but to be fair, they dealt with some injuries. You know, they lost Danielle Hunter halfway through the year. So, and he's a big playmaker up front. And obviously the defensive backfield, you know, those guys struggled a whole lot. But, you know, you're hoping this season they've made some additions and some changes in the backfield where hopefully they'll be better. But yeah, definitely the defense was a huge problem. And so were special teams. I mean, going back to that Cardinals game, and Greg Joseph, you know, he shanks a 37-yard field goal, breaks Vikings fans' hearts, you know, in what was otherwise a hell of a football game. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely not Kirk Cousins' fault. It's more of that contract that people kind of look at. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's more of a defensive issue in Minnesota right now, or last season.
Cardinals fans, you guys picked up the Vikings picked up a couple of former Cardinals last season. They signed Patrick Peterson to a 1-year deal, who then re-signed with the Vikings this offseason, and the Cardinals traded Mason Cole, offensive lineman, to the Vikings. What was their so Patrick? We felt his best days were behind him. There was still what I felt from the end of his time in the Cardinals, he still had elite lockdown play ability, but his bads got bad, and they weren't always consistent. How was Patrick's play in the defensive scheme, and Mason Cole, did he do anything for y'all last year?
I mean, not much for the Mason Cole side of things. Vikings, they obviously struggled on the offensive line pretty significantly, especially at those interior positions. But look at, and then obviously a tackle, they're pretty much set there. But looking at a Patrick Peterson, Patrick Peterson is still a really good player. Obviously, he's not the Patrick Peterson of old. He's not the All-Pro Patrick Peterson, or maybe even the Pro Bowl Patrick Peterson. But he comes from, he has that treasure trove of knowledge, of experience in the backfield, and he's somebody the Vikings can trust back there. And that's a big reason why they pushed to sign him again this season as well, to stand opposite of a young and upcoming group right now. But definitely Patrick Peterson, he was, for his age and what he's capable of doing at this point in his career, he's fine back there. I'd rather have him than not have him and just go all young, especially if the Vikings are truly serious about this win now season, which we keep hearing about.
Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast of SR Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's move to the offseason and discuss the additions, the subtractions, and the draft picks that they take this offseason. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web. We've moved on. We're with Jordy McElroy from VikingsWire.com, managing editor over there. And it's time to talk about the offseason that the Vikings have had. We know two transactions that happened because they involve the Cardinals. They add Jordan Hicks, and Nick Vigil leaves to play, who signed with the Cardinals. But before we talk about any of all that, so Kirk Cousins redoes his contract. So he is now under contract through 2023. There's his cap number is still ridiculous. Though honestly, if you look at how quarterback contracts are going right now, a cap hit of $31.5 million isn't crazy anymore. That said, Kirk Cousins comes back. I remember before last season, when they drafted Kellen Mond, that was it was interesting because of the conversation. Do the Vikings think that Kellen Mond could be their future after Kirk Cousins?
So Kellen Mond is he really is an interesting topic of conversation because the Vikings had drafted him last year, and Mike Zimmer, that was more of a Rick Spielman type of draft pick. Mike Zimmer he never really seemed interested at all in Kellen Mond last season. So Kellen Mond really didn't get much of a chance. And there was actually a press conference of Mike Zimmer, and there's a reporter. It's at the very end of the season. The Vikings, they're out of the playoffs. They're not making it. And a reporter had asked about, maybe seeing Kellen Mond at the end of the season. And Mike Zimmer said, not interested. And he looks dead at this reporter, and he's like, not interested. And they're kind of like, well, why? And he's like, because I've seen him. You're just like, okay. But to be fair, Kevin O'Connell's come in, and they've been kind of singing Kellen Mond's praises throughout the spring practices, and you're kind of hoping that maybe he can step in as a backup over Sean Mannion behind Kirk Cousins. But as far as seeing him actually replacing Kirk Cousins in the future, I think we're just way too far off from that right now. I'm actually looking at this more as like this is a rookie season for Kellen Mond under a head coach that actually wants him to be there.
All right. One of the biggest changes that happened this coming off season is, obviously the new head coach, Kevin O'Connell, replacing Mike Zimmer. What is sort of did you like the hire? 1, 2, what's different? What's different about O'Connell thus far? We haven't had training camp yet. We're looking at the offseason program. What's new about this kid? I mean, he's young. He's another one of these young hotshot coaches. He's a Sean McVay guy, and all the Sean McVay guys are getting hired across the league. He's already got a coaching tree as large as probably some of the, almost as current. His coaching tree is about as big as Bill Belichick's at this point, it feels like.
It really is, and it's kind of crazy, and I love the hire. Jess, like that new car smell, that new car smell. You get in that new car, and it smells so great, and it kind of revitalizes you a little bit, and you're just ready to drive around and just show it off, right? And that's kind of the feeling you get right now within the Minnesota Vikings organization. That new car smell, Mike Zimmer, he was around for 8 seasons. That's an incredibly long time for a head coach in this day and age. You kind of have the car for 8 years, and the old gym socks are sitting in the back seat, and the musty gym bag and papers thrown everywhere and McDonald's cups. So it was time for something brand new in Minnesota, and you hear that all of the time. Like so many players have come forward and they said, we feel a new energy with this guy. We feel revitalized, and to top it all off, he's coming from a Los Angeles Rams team where he was a hell of an offensive coordinator, and he helped lead those guys to a Super Bowl. And for a Vikings team that never won a Super Bowl and they haven't even made the playoffs in the last 2 seasons, to have a guy like that, like you said, from the Sean McVay coaching tree, kind of waltz on in, you feel a little revitalized. You feel like, hey, maybe he can give us some of this rub, and maybe we can take a shot. Maybe we can be this year's Cincinnati Bengals.
All right, looking at free agency. Any significant losses? It felt like Danielle Hunter might have been, and we were hoping over here in Arizona potentially, if they had to pay that $18 million bonus or whatever it was, that they would deal him before that came due. But he's back. Who were the significant losses that the Vikings had in the offseason?
Okay, so for the Vikings, it's a weird situation. They didn't have a ton of significant losses. It wasn't a situation where Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the new GM in Minnesota, he didn't come into this Lego castle and he just kicked the thing down like he was Andre the Giant, his first year in. So, they wanted to kind of keep the roster as is, as much intact as possible, and try to win now this season. Now, some of the key guys that I will mention that aren't with the team any longer, Anthony Barr. That's a very big name, 4-time Pro Bowler, significant contributions to that linebacking core, great player over there. And then obviously you lose a guy like an Everson Griffin as well. That's another guy who has a long history within the Vikings organization. And Xavier Woods, who was in on 100% of the snaps, which is absolutely ridiculous, even though it was a 1-year stop in Minnesota. He's another guy that you could probably count as a key loss in a year where there really weren't many.
And it's interesting because Barr remains unsigned. He was an interesting guy because physically, I think he would fit as an edge defender, and had the potential of doing that, but has played off the ball and played at a pretty high level while he was there in Minnesota. The key additions, I know one that makes that will impact the most probably defensively is the addition of Zadarius Smith, which it has to feel like a win because, one, he departs the Packers in the division and then bolsters the Vikings, giving them Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter off the edge. And we know about Jordan Hicks. What are the impact that those two are going to have, and who else of note did the Vikings add this offseason?
So it's obviously a win when you can give it to the Packers a little bit, plus get a great player in return. And man, Zadarius Smith, the thought of him and Danielle Hunter together, it's absolutely ridiculous. Patrick Peterson, he had actually came out and he made a comment saying that, seeing those two coming off the edge together, he's never seen that before in his career. He's never had that on the same team as him. So that's saying a lot coming from a guy like Patrick Peterson. And, I like to consider Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith as the new Bash brothers. I don't know if anybody watched the Mighty Ducks, Dean Portman and Fulton Reed in here. But those guys are going to be –
I'm old enough to remember the original Bash brothers of the Oakland A's, Mark McGuire and Jose Forsaken Seiko in like 1989. I remember that.
I was 3 years old and in diapers, so I wasn't quite around then at that time. So, which is sad. So I guess I have the little Disney knowledge here. but Zadarius Smith, he's a guy that can change things right away. And we talked about how much that defensive backfield struggled, but it's a lot easier when quarterbacks have less time to throw in the pocket, when you have those two monsters coming at you on every snap. And then also, like you said, Jordan Hicks, who would be another experienced linebacker fitting in right next to Eric Kendricks. They're going to be a good duo. I know we haven't really gotten to the rookies yet, but Brian Asamoah, he's a guy we might end up talking about here soon, but he's had a good camp too. He might be able to compete with Jordan Hicks there, for some snaps as well. But another pickup, obviously Harrison Phillips up front. Don't want to forget about him. The Vikings, they had some leaks up front. They had some leaks the size of the Titanic on their defensive front. So getting a guy like Harrison Phillips up there, you're hoping you can kind of stuff the run a little bit better. But a guy that nobody's really talking about, and this is another little stab at the Green Bay Packers, is Chandon Sullivan. And, they have a guy like that come in as a slot corner, a veteran guy, somebody that you can rely on in that position, has made plays for years for the Packers, but he's kind of going a little bit unnoticed, as most slot corners do. But he's a guy to keep an eye on as well that could make a big and immediate impact his first year as a Viking.
Moving to the draft, you had quite a few selections. They had the first round pick, you had 2 in the second. They had a couple of the trades that they made. Their first round pick, Lewis Cine out of Georgia. Is he going to be a guy? Is he expected to kind of take the field, be an impact player as a rookie?
Okay, so Lewis Cine, he should probably come with a parental control rating of an R, because I don't know if you guys have played Madden at all or anything, but this guy, he hit sticks people out of their cleats. I mean, this guy's a very scary defender. He just did an interview with Patrick Peterson and Brian McFadden on All Things Covered podcast, where he said, his goal in the NFL this year is to stack bodies. So
I remember that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's absolutely terrifying. But the thought is, having a guy like that who's incredibly smart, who's incredibly physical, and you put a guy like that next to Harrison Hitman Smith, I mean, it's a pretty terrifying duo there. And, he's open to learning. And I think the Vikings don't just view him as somebody that can help them right now, but they view him as a possible replacement for Harrison Smith, who's getting up there in age. This guy could be one of the cornerstones of your franchise.
They add on day 2, Clemson cornerback Andrew Booth, LSU guard Ed Ingram, and then Oklahoma linebacker Brian Asamoah, a guy that you mentioned. Any of those guys expected to make an impact in 2022?
So for Andrew Booth, he missed a lot of spring practices because he's coming off of a sports hernia surgery that he had to go through. So he's got some catching up to do. And I think people are kind of underestimating Cam Dantzler there as well. He's not just going to hand Booth that job, right? Booth's going to have to come in and compete for that job. And, it would not shock me if Booth kind of came off the bench a little bit and he kind of worked in behind Dantzler throughout this whole season. Now, he might end up taking that job, but it wouldn't surprise me because of how good I think Dantzler might be this year if Booth actually has to work in behind Dantzler a little bit. Ed Ingram is a guy that the team desperately hopes can make an impact right away. That right guard position, a real trouble spot for the Vikings. They had Ali Uday in there last season. They had drafted Wyatt Davis out of the 3rd round last year, and he just hasn't really panned out. They've even gone out and got a couple of veterans in Jesse Davis and Chris Reed. They're just desperately trying to fix that position, and they're hoping a guy out of LSU like an Ed Ingram can kind of come in, learn the ropes, and be able to step in and be a permanent stay at that position. And then obviously Brian Asamoah, the guy, I mean, speed kills, right? And his kills on the football field. He's moving up and down the sidelines like the Flash. I mean, he's so incredibly fast and so talented. I think he's a guy that kind of took people by storm and a little surprise in the spring practices, but he's definitely turning heads, and he might eat into some starting snaps. Who knows as the season goes on.
Day 3, there were 6 selections they made. Missouri cornerback Caleb Evans, Minnesota defensive end. It says he owned, I have no idea how to pronounce that. Otameo.
I don't either. It was tough.
North Carolina running back Ty Chandler, a guy I coveted for the Cardinals. The guy is big. The guy is fast, and he can do a lot of stuff. Illinois tackle Vidarian Lowe, Michigan State receiver Jalen Naylor, and then South Carolina tight end Nick Muse. Of those 6 day 3 picks, do you see a year 1 impact on any of them, and which players have are you most optimistic of being contributors at all this year in the years to come?
So Caleb Evans is a guy to kind of keep an eye on as well. He probably won't win the starting job between Andrew Booth and Cam Dantzler fighting it out across from Patrick Peterson. But he's somebody with a long shot chance. He really is. And he's had a really good spring practice. He's also become quite the fan favorite. Y'all don't follow him on Twitter. I don't know his handle off the top of my head, but his Rabbit Benji's pretty hilarious on there. But he has a size for it. He has that confidence, and he's been stepping in. He's been, stepping up right away. And you have to think, with Patrick Peterson kind of getting up there in age a little bit, how much longer can he go? And when will the Vikings be ready to kind of turn everything over to the young guys? And he's one of those guys. You can kind of picture a scenario of Andrew Booth Jr. and a Caleb Evans as your top 2 cornerbacks. So he's a guy to definitely keep an eye on. Ty Chandler, we talked about him earlier. He's off the stream and everything, but he's amazing. He's a very versatile running back. He can run the ball. He can make catches. And you're looking at it from a Vikings perspective of this being a contract year for Alexander Mattison. You got to kind of look and see what's behind Dalvin Cook. And you look at a guy like a Ty Chandler as possibly somebody that stands out. Kene Nwangwu, he's obviously not a rookie, but he's another guy that they're kind of hoping kind of takes that next step as a backup role behind Dalvin Cook at running back. But those are the 2 guys that I really look towards making an impact right away, a Caleb Evans and a Ty Chandler as rookies their first year.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's look ahead to the 2022 season, what the expectations are for the Vikings, and how they view their week against the Cardinals. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best star of Cardinals talk on the web. Still talking to Jordy McElroy from VikingsWire.com, the managing editor over there. Looking ahead to the 2022 season, you mentioned it's a win now mentality. What are the expectations for the team? What do you think their floor and their ceiling is potentially in 2022?
So the expectations for the team, if you're paying Kirk Cousins another year to stick around, and you're giving him a no trade clause on his contract to stick around, and then obviously, like you just mentioned about the Danielle Hunter going out there and you're paying him money to stick around, you're in a win now mode. And by win now, I don't mean making it to the playoffs and playing in a wild card game and getting bounced out and going home. No, you have to win a playoff game. That's the ceiling for me. They have to win a playoff game. If you don't win a playoff game, then you get to the scenario where, ownership might walk into Kwesi's office and they might give him the go ahead to do the Andre the Giant thing and kick over those toy Legos and rebuild things from scratch all over again. But they have to win a playoff game. The floor, and it's sad to say, I can see him being even again, basically, winning their little 8 games or 9 games or something like that and barely missing. That's the floor, because you're running it back with the same roster in hopes that the new coaching staff can turn over a new leaf there and make things feel different and, hopefully get different results than you've had the previous 2 seasons. But obviously, if that doesn't pan off, you could be right back where you started.
as I look across the NFC in particular, I think it is fair to say that the division winners from last season are likely to repeat. You got the Rams in the West, the Packers in the North. You've got the Bucks in the South, and then the Cowboys in the East. And then I think that there are about 5 legitimate playoff contenders for the wild card: the Cardinals, the Vikings, the Saints, the Eagles, who I think also could push Dallas in the NFC East for the division, and then the 49ers if Trey Lance is okay. I think people are too high on 49ers, but I think of those 5 teams, those are the we're going to see the 3 wild card teams out of those 5, and I've got the Vikings in that group. As you look at that Week 8 game against the Cardinals in Minnesota, is that game considered a should win, toss up, or a steal? If they were to win that game, it would be considered stealing a win.
I mean, look, when you have an offense with the firepower that the Minnesota Vikings have right now, and you've obviously made all these additions to the defensive side of the ball, and you've kept everything as is, I think every game is a should win. They should win every game, and they should approach the season that way. You know, I look at the Week 1 game against the Green Bay Packers, which is a huge one right off the bat. You know, you're in Minnesota, you have to win that game. Like, you need to win that game to kind of show that, you know, we're in this win now mode because we believe we can win now. I mean, if you don't think you can win now, then you would have blown it all up, and, you know, why are we here at this point? But yeah, by Week 8, I would think that that's a should win, if not for anything, but to make up for that 37-yard whip on Greg Joseph's end.
Oh, man.
And then obviously that Kyler Murray pass that bounced off of Eric Kendricks' hand, and then Max Williams had made the catch and ran for all those yards. You know what play I'm talking about?
Yes,
I mean, it's stuff like that. It's stuff like that. Come on. Yes. Should win, Vikings. You better win.
Good stuff. So if you're going to make a prediction for, not for the game, but for the Viking season, how do you see it playing out? Do you see them overtaking the Packers in the division? How many wins you see them, and do you believe they will meet the expectation that you have of them of winning a playoff game this year?
Okay, so I'm a little hesitant to actually choose them over the Packers. I've seen some people pound their chest a little bit. I'm not quite there yet. I do think that they will split even with the Packers. I think the Vikings come out in the first game of the season. I think they shock the Packers. But then I think the Packers get them in the second game later on down the road. I believe the Vikings make it to the playoffs as a wild card, and I believe they win a playoff game. I'm going there. I feel like they have so much talent on the offensive side of the ball. I feel like the defense has improved just enough. I still have some concerns about the back end a little bit, but I feel like that they've made the improvements, and I think Kevin O'Connell being there is going to boost their confidence enough to get to the playoffs and win at least one game. Now, I can't promise you that'll satiate the thirst for winning the Vikings nations that they have right now, but they'll win a playoff game, I believe.
All right. Jordy McElroy from the VikingsWire.com. Jordy, do you have aside from the site, everyone should know it's one of the NFL USA Today Wire sites. It's our sister site. Jordy, is there a way that my listeners can follow you, find your work on social media?
Yeah, of course, man. Twitter, you can find me on Twitter at JordyMcElroy.com. Only send nice tweets, please. All fans welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordy. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we will have the final of the opponent previews. The Cardinals' final second-place opponent on their schedule, which is the New England Patriots. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. Next up on our opponent preview series is the New England Patriots. And for the second time in 3 years, the Cardinals will take on the Patriots. And for the second time in 3 off seasons, I have with me talking about the Patriots is Henry McKenna from PatriotsWire.com. Henry, great to have you on. Apparently, now between the last time you came on and today, you had a wedding and a wedding celebration post-COVID. So it's been good. The Patriots made it back to the playoffs post Tom Brady. So I mean, life isn't too bad these days.
Yeah, the team, well, we'll see. I mean, it could get really dark this year. And I suppose in terms of the Patriots, not in terms of my life. My life is great. But if you ask, the talking heads around media, they're going to tell you that the Patriots are going to stink this year. And, there's definitely an argument to be made there. So a good year for Mac Jones in his rookie season. Patriots are one and done in the playoffs. And you kind of think, hey, maybe there's something to this team, this new quarterback. But then you look at the score of that Buffalo game, it was 47-17. How could you possibly hope to be competitive in a division where you lose to the rival 47-17? So some highs and lows, both in my life and in Patriots land over the last, 18, 20 months.
So let's look back at the 2021 season. So 2020 didn't go as expected. They managed to beat the Cardinals, but they still missed the playoffs with Cam Newton and company playing at quarterback. And they basically have Mac Jones fall in their lap in the draft. Let's take it back to that day. How surprised were you that, one, Jones was available, and how pleased were you that they were able to get him? And then following up on that, what did you think of his rookie campaign? Yeah,
so I think at the time there was this interesting narrative that the Patriots wanted Elijah Vera Tucker. He went to the Jets, the pick before, I think at 14, the Jets traded up. So the Jets felt like they'd gotten this coup to get, Zach Wilson and their interior guard they'd really been hoping for and steal that player away from the Patriots. Meanwhile, I don't know, man. The Patriots got Mac Jones at 15. I don't think they were too upset that Vera Tucker wasn't there. And so, yeah, match made in heaven. I think Mac Jones whispered to the commissioner on the night of the draft. He says, that's where I really wanted to go. I'm really happy. There are so many reasons why Alabama prospects would be perfect for a Patriot system. And it starts with Nick Saban and Bill Belichick being basically clones of one another, but just made for different levels of competition, where Saban dominates college, Belichick dominates pros. And I think Jones, in so many ways, he's not Tom Brady. We've been over that a million times. I'm sure even everyone in Arizona is probably sick of hearing that, but he is similar. There are ways in which, Mac Jones, think about Joe Burrow, right? Think about who else? But I can't think of another name. But basically, it's you don't need the most elite passer in the NFL, contrary to what is currently trending at the quarterback position. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, amazing talents and just so much better than the rest. Justin Herbert is a similar talent. But you look at Joe Burrow, and it's not like he's one of those guys from a measurable standpoint. He's not throwing fastballs. But he's got enough touch and he's got enough power to be a competent NFL quarterback. So where these quarterbacks who just aren't exactly firing rockets can make up for it is processing power. And we saw over the course of Mac Jones's rookie season develop his processing power at a staggering clip. And I cannot impress this upon, your listeners enough, in that, I've watched a lot of quarterbacks. I've been on the Patriots beat now. This is going to be my 6th year. So I've watched Jimmy Garoppolo. I've watched Jacoby Brissett. I've watched Jarrett Stidham. I've watched Danny Etling. I've never seen a quarterback come into this offense and grasp it so quickly and with so much command. This was different. This was different than Jimmy Garoppolo. So I was enormously impressed with how fast he was operating, even in minicamp in his rookie season. Fast forward to minicamp this year, he's an even more advanced quarterback. We're seeing him attack the deep third of the field. We're seeing him trust his receivers in a new way that, they're blanketed in coverage, and he kind of just puts it in a place where either they're going to catch it or nobody will. And all of a sudden they're coming down with the ball. So, maybe it's minicamp and maybe there isn't pads and maybe there's no contact. So the offense has a significant advantage. But to see that aggressive decision-making, now that is where Mac Jones was lacking in his rookie season. So we talked about progress of the mental game, and he's getting it. but then we need him to like take a step forward in like the risk-taking game. You want to see a quarterback who's willing to do not just the check down at all times, which was kind of where he was last year. That's why he finished 8th in completion percentage, but be a risk taker and bump up that yards per attempt average. And that's where I think Mac Jones has a real chance to be like a top 15 quarterback this year, as opposed to just like a top 23, let's say top 22 quarterback last year.
When he coming out of college, I worried about what Mac Jones's ceiling would be, because if you look at the time at Alabama, he was basically the guy that Nick Saban was left with that last year. Like he was the backup, was it to 2 other stud quarterbacks that came out of that system, and he finally got his chance. Yep. And I thought, of course he could be good. How much higher? What do you think his ceiling in, and do you think that last year was more of a high? Because most people felt he was a pretty high floor player because of the smarts and coming out of that system and the experience that he had. But do you think that his ceiling is much higher than what it is? Well, than what he did coming out.
Yeah. I think his ceiling could be Matt Ryan. I think that's kind of the comp that I like really to go
good.
with.
Like if he can,
it's
hit
a really
that,
good,
really good.
Yeah, it's an excellent pocket passer. It's a guy who's been to a Super Bowl and maybe lost it pretty gruesome fashion. But I was at that Super Bowl covering it for the Patriots, and I think that's the ceiling for me. But I also think it's possible, I bet people were saying Baker Mayfield could be Drew Brees a few years ago. And it's possible that you get excited about how much a rookie develops in the first year. And then you see he kind of gets to the end of year 2 and you're like, well, that really slowed down. Like, there's the Will Ferrell meme from Anchorman, things escalated quickly. Yeah. And that tends to happen for a rookie, right? They do escalate quickly. But then when you get into year 2, the question is it still on the upward trajectory or is it plateauing? And that's what I'm curious to see from Jones. Everything in minicamp indicated that he's still, headed on an upward trajectory, but you just never know. And I think what's interesting about the Patriots fan base is they haven't been exposed to this new era of like develop your rookie quick or he's out. It's just like, Patriots fans haven't been through the quarterback carousel for 20 years.
No.
So there's a whole generation that's never even seen one, at least in New England. So they don't have experience with like how it feels to draft a quarterback in round 1, have them be promising because they're on that rookie deal and you can build a big salary around them of other skill players, which is what the Patriots have done. Spent a lot of money at receiver and tight end. And they're going to build that around him. They're going to try and support him to, send him on an upward trajectory. And you get excited about the Baker Mayfields. You get excited even about the Kyler Murrays. Like, I think Kyler Murray is an excellent quarterback. I just, he is kind of waffling a little bit in his development. And Sam Darnold, right? I mean, he had an exciting year. Seriously, like you look at his stats, he wasn't like out of the question of being like a good quarterback after year 1. There are players that just seem like something's going to happen and then it doesn't. So the Patriots fans have just not seen anything like that before. But so far, so good with Mac Jones.
If you look at the totality of last season, did in terms of how they did in the regular season, exceed expectations? Obviously, the playoff loss was staggering. It was disappointing. But again, it was against a team that people thought probably was a Super Bowl team. So you had the Bills, you had the Chiefs, both, and no one thought the Bengals were going to be in that category. They ended up being there. But both the Bills and the Chiefs were kind of the teams that everyone felt were Super Bowl teams that could and should make it there. Taking that playoff loss out, did the season exceed expectations, meet them, or with a rookie quarterback, could you have expected more than that?
No, I think you make a good point. And it's sort of the point that I think the Patriots were making internally, which is, maybe take away the final score of that game. If that game was like a touchdown away or even 10 points difference, this would be a pretty different takeaway from that season. The other thing I think that kind of, that didn't look good for the Patriots was that they skidded into the postseason. So they lost 4 of their last 6 games. And then they lost their postseason game. So that's, 5 of the last 7.
That's really kind of what happened with the Cardinals too.
Yeah.
I will say this, like with what happened with the Cardinals last year, it was very disappointing how it ended. But if you look at like big picture, going into last season, the Rams were a Super Bowl favorite, and the Cardinals were expected to be a team that competed for a wild card spot, but probably wasn't going to win the division. Yeah, they started out hot, but at the end of the year, they were a game out of the division title, and they lost to the team that everyone thought would win the Super Bowl. So, like meeting expectations, they met the expectations that there were for the year. It's just how it happened was very disappointing because they started so hot.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the Patriots were it was a weird, streaky season. 1-3 to start the first. Oh man, I just flipped the opposite of this schedule. So I have to apologize. They started the season losing 4 of their first 6. I'm sorry. I flipped.
And then they got hot.
And then they finished their season losing 3 of their last 4. So it was a season of streaks. I just was like flipping the exact numbers. So it was like start slow because you have a rookie quarterback, get hot, and then the weird thing was finish poorly. I didn't anticipate that happening. You lose to Miami in the final week of the season. Like that's a disappointment. And it impacted their seeding. It was the reason why they played Buffalo and why they then got their teeth kicked in by Buffalo. But they even had like ugly losses to Indianapolis and Buffalo in those final weeks. So yeah, I don't know. It was a sort of sour taste. But yes, it's kind of like, do you get caught in the trees on the season, or can you take that bird's eye view and be like, look, rookie quarterback, Bill Belichick spent $1 bazillion in free agency and no one knew if it would stick. And they come out with a 10-7 season and a playoff appearance. Like that's something to be okay with, especially if there's something to build on. I think just people are afraid that they don't have as much to build on in 2022 and that there's less room for optimism because they did more losing of talent than they did of gaining talent.
So let's come in next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about what happened in the offseason for New England. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're back with Henry McKenna from PatriotsWire.com. We talked about how their season went with rookie Mac Jones. Let's move to the offseason. You mentioned several losses. Who were the key losses in this offseason, and how will that impact them moving forward?
Yeah, so the Patriots lost some interior offensive linemen. They let Ted Karras walk in free agency. They traded away Shaq Mason, their starting guard, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers
for almost nothing. That was a weird. Yeah, that was a weird trade to me.
It was basically for salary cap space, and then they had a guard that was the starter last year but lost his job, but is a really good player, which sounds weird to say. His name is Michael Onwenu. He'll be their starter next year, and then they drafted Cole Strange in the first round. A shocker to many, but
yes.
He will be. Yeah. But he will be their starter as well. And then you lose cornerback J.C. Jackson, the number 1 option on the team. He is in L.A. now with the Chargers. Massive deal over there. So I think like you look at and then you look at the linebacker group. They cut Kyle Van Noy for salary cap reasons. They let Dante Hightower sit in free agency. It's unclear what he's going to do. I think, just guessing, that he is not getting the money he wants, and so he's probably going to retire unless someone comes in with a decent deal. And then Jamie Collins, again, they've decided not to re-sign him. That kind of frees up salary cap space. And then they traded away Chase Winovich. It's probably not a name that many people are familiar with, but he was a a depth option on sort of outside linebacker that seemed like he was on the verge of breaking out at all points during his Patriots career, but really just I think was like a cultural misfit, and it didn't come together. So that's kind of where they're at in terms of losing talent. As far as gaining talent, they added a few cornerbacks in free agency. They first of all, they started by getting Malcolm Butler out of retirement. A guy you guys.
I don't know what happened last season. Like he was set to be one of their three main players.
Yeah.
And then nope, I'm retiring. Wait, what? And
it
never was there were whispers that he was unhappy with his role. Vance Joseph said he was going to play. He had an important role in the team, but they liked Marco Wilson. The rookie was going to start, and I was very, very intrigued by that because in off-season work, Butler was cornerback 3. Like he would come in as their third cornerback, which made sense because of the supposed concerns about his ability, like his legs and being able to withhold the season and losing a step. And then Marco Wilson ended up being the starter after Butler retired, but now he's back with the Patriots. One of those many cornerbacks that play at a high level, and the Pats just let go. Like Butler, Gilmore, J.C. Jackson. They just keep bringing in younger guys that do well, and then just let them get paid elsewhere.
Logan Ryan's another name.
Yeah,
Bill Belichick is the king of drafting cornerbacks or not. Malcolm Butler and J.C. Jackson were not drafted and went on to be number 1 corners. So he's bringing he's bringing Malcolm Butler back. Maybe in a few years he'll bring back J.C. Jackson too. We'll see. That seems like the way that it goes. And Terrence Mitchell, another name, and Jabril Peppers. Basically, except for Malcolm Butler, there are not a lot of names that people will recognize. They retained some talent. Trent Brown, who will be playing left tackle. They're going to switch positions with their right and left tackle. Isaiah Wynn flipping to right. Trent Brown seems to be flipping to the left. And then they retained Devin
Brown
McCourty.
Returned, right? Because he had gone to the Raiders, was it?
He was meeting with the Seahawks.
Okay.
I guess actually you make a great point, which you didn't even know you made, which is the coaching staff left for the Raiders. Josh McDaniels, the offensive coordinator, brought 3 offensive assistants, offensive line coach, receivers coach, who's now the offensive coordinator there, and assistant quarterbacks coach. So that's 4 offensive staffers headed to Vegas. And that meant that Matt Patricia moved from director of football research into an offensive assistant role. And Joe Judge goes from being fired from New York as the head coach there to quarterbacks coach, offensive assistant. So that's kind of the area of intrigue, if anything. It's not actually players because the Patriots did so little in the player acquisition department. It was
Trent Brown. I did remember Trent Brown did. He did spend a couple of years with the Raiders after a year with the Pats in 2018.
Oh, yes. Sorry. They traded for him last year.
That's right. They've got him back.
And so they traded for him last year, and he started on their right side last year. And then his contract was up, so they retained him for 2 more years, actually. And now he's going to play on the left, it looks like. So, it's sort of a weird year. And again, the fact that I kind of am talking about these players who are supposed to replace the departures and these coaches who are supposed to replace the departures, and that nobody really knows who they are, or they do, and it's Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, and everybody's freaking out, at least in New England. I think people are like,
but in those roles, they were great in New England.
I mean, you make a good point. But the trick is Matt Patricia was on defense. He's on offense now. So Patricia helped them win a Super Bowl on defense. And then Judge helped them win Super Bowls on special teams. So I think people argue, well, these guys are kind of like fish out of water in a different, side of the ball. And we'll see. I mean, I don't know. It's really hard to say.
Did you see Matt Patricia's defenses in Detroit? Come on.
Yeah.
that was not fun. But
no.
So the draft comes. So the surprise was Cole Strange. I will say that was when my co-host and I for this show, we did our mock draft. Cole Strange was kind of a target that we felt the Cardinals might look at in round 2, round 3, and then he goes at the end of round 1 to New England. They're like, wait a minute, is this one of those cases where they are the smartest in the building, or that they think that they're the smartest in the building?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like, nobody knows yet, right? But what they saw in him was an extremely smart, extremely competitive, extremely athletic,
very athletic.
Yeah, extremely coachable talent. And I think that's what they want is when they draft a guy in the first round, they want him to project, not just to be a day one starter, but also to be like a year 2 captain. They want players who are going to immediately understand the system, immediately be physically and mentally able to contribute, and then have the leadership skills to be locker room presences. So they want all-around guys, and that's what Cole Strange was to them. Maybe not to other teams, but the Patriots don't give a hoot about what other teams believe. They're going to do exactly what they think is best for their team. So if they've got a round 1 grade on Strange, I mean, they were clearly like aware that nobody else was going out there to get Strange in round 1. So they traded back and they picked up some draft capital, and then they got Strange. They got their day 1 starter. He's been lined up in left guard since day 1 of minicamp. So the expectation for him is clear. You are the guy.
Yeah.
You got to protect Mac Jones's left side.
I like you could tell that they were going for some athleticism in their first few picks, because you get Tyquan Thornton out of Baylor, who is crazy fast.
He ran the fastest.
Yeah. Marcus Jones, who is a little guy but fierce cornerback. Then Jack Jones, a guy that interesting career here at Arizona State, where he has numbers, but had some troubles here and also made a lot of plays. So there's a high ceiling for him, and I could see him being one of those New England guys that pans out. And then also Pierre Strong was a running back I would have loved the Cardinals to get in day 3, but they didn't have any picks they didn't have a pick in the 4th round, so, or 5th round for that matter. And so I was just waiting. So I really, really like some of the players that New England picked up. I don't like how many of these guys are expected to be impact or contributors in year 1. Obviously, they with Cole Strange, they've got him slated for the starting lineup. But what about Thornton and Jones? It's
tricky to project. The guy that I think will play the most among that second tier of players, Thornton, Jones, and Jones, that's going to be Jack Jones, because like I mentioned, Malcolm Butler, you even said it, he's like, dude, does he have the legs? Does he have the health? Can you make it a whole season? Terrence Mitchell, nobody knows if he's even good. And then Jalen Mills is the number 2 cornerback from last year. He'll probably solidify one of the corner spots. I suspect Jack Jones, Malcolm Butler, Terrence Mitchell, and Jalen Mills will all have roles. It's just that at the end of the season, maybe Malcolm Butler and Jack Jones actually end up with a similar snap count, because as the season goes on, Jack will play more. Marcus Jones has a guy named John Jones. All the Joneses are in the Patriots cornerback group. And guess what? During practice, Mac Jones is targeting them. So it has made for a wildly confusing set of notebooks I'm trying to...
Jones picks off Jones, but which Jones did it?
Yeah, exactly. A trick play where Marcus Jones was throwing to Mac Jones with Jack Jones in coverage. I think that Marcus Jones won't be able to get past Jonathan Jones, who's their starting slot, and Marcus Jones isn't big enough to play anything other than slot. So that will probably be preventative for him in year 1. And then Tyquan Thornton is sitting behind a receiver depth chart that includes Devontae Parker, who I actually didn't mention as an acquisition. I meant to, but he was a trade, not free agency acquisition. And then Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers. Those are 4 players who all deserve snaps. And Thornton will have to fight his way into the mix. The only way I see Thornton really contributing meaningfully in year 1 is if they trade Nelson Aguilar before the start of the 53-man roster cut down. Because Aguilar and Thornton are very similar players and will have similar roles in the offense. And Aguilar can save them about $8 million worth of cap space if traded. So, and they need cap space. So trade Aguilar, in my opinion, I think you just do it. But Bill Belichick spent a lot of money on Nelson Aguilar last year, and I think he's probably stubborn enough to just make Thornton sit basically all year and come back to Thornton next year, try and get something out of Aguilar this year.
Makes sense. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on them. Let's come back and talk about their outlook, the Patriots and their outlook for the coming season. Not a prediction, but how they match up against a team like Arizona. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. You're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Still on the show with Henry McKenna from PatriotsWire.com, the managing editor over there for our NFL Wire site for the USA Today NFL Wire. And we've talked about how they did last season, the growth of Mac Jones, and then the offseason that they've had. Let's look ahead to this coming season. Henry said that the prospects for this season feel a little less optimistic than how the season went last year. What are sort of the hopes and expectations for the Patriots in 2022?
Yeah, I think the hopes are win a Super Bowl. I mean, like if you ask
obviously Patriots fans are used to that. Yes, but reasonable expectation. Yes.
Realistically, they got to make the playoffs. And I did my season prediction once the schedule came out, and I think they're an 8-9 team, maybe like a 7-10 team. We talked about the evolution of Mac Jones. We talked about how high can he develop. If they're not going to win more, they're not going to be over 500 if Mac Jones doesn't step up in a huge way this year. If he remains this conservative decision maker who manages, he's not even a game manager yet. He just tries not to lose games. That's what he looked like last year. So if he can manage games, if he can be value added to an offense and elevate the skill players around him, then this offense will have a totally different shape in 2022. And then they have a chance of actually winning games. It just felt like games were out of their control in 2021 against good quarterbacks like Dak Prescott. And it just the Patriots were so unable to take control of fourth quarters. Mac Jones and the offense couldn't go punch for punch with good offenses. They just had to rely on the defense to shut down opposing offenses, and that didn't always work. So that has to change, especially because the defense just isn't as good. They're not going to be able to limit the opposing offenses quite like they were doing last year. So it's not like Mac Jones needs to take one step forward. It's like he needs to take 3 steps forward. It needs to be a totally different player. It's nice that he was solid, that he was steady in year 1, but it's not even close to what's going to be enough in year 2. And so that's where they go the way that Mac Jones goes. If he gets big, if he gets to be a top 15 quarterback, this team's going to be relevant. But if he stays in top 20 land, this team's not making the playoffs.
Do you think that with the additions that the Dolphins made, that is it going to be a real battle for second place? Do you see the Patriots being better than the Dolphins, or do you see the Dolphins as slightly ahead at this point roster-wise? And we're not going to talk about the Jets because the Jets are still the Jets. And while I think they're improved, I think their improvements come more in 2023. Yeah,
I agree with you on that point with the Jets. Here's the thing about having covered the Patriots for 6 years and seeing Bill Belichick for 20 years is I talked a little bit about how there are things Patriots fans are not used to, which is quarterback carousels, rookie quarterback expectations, etc. What they are used to is seeing coaching turnover, player turnover, generate a huge amount of buzz, and not actually materialize into something meaningful. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the Patriots are still the second best team in the division. I'm going to say that the Dolphins are going to nip at the Patriots' heels. The Dolphins last year didn't even have as good of a team as they have this year, but they beat the Patriots twice last year. They swept the Patriots, and that was a big problem for New England. So I think people who are knowledgeable about the AFC East are kind of probably screaming through their car or whatever they're listening to on their podcast, being like, how can you say the Patriots are better? They were actually worse. It was so obvious. But they still finished higher than the Dolphins, even with those two games.
So you're thinking that there will not be a wild card team coming out of the AFC East this coming year.
Well, it would be Buffalo and New England. Is that what you mean?
Right. If you're saying that they're going to be like 8-9 this year.
So you're saying picking 3 teams from the AFC East?
No, that without the wild card, that at 8-9, do you think that they'll be a wild card team, especially when you look at like the AFC West, that top to bottom looks?
Oh, so you're saying, do I think that like altogether the Patriots missed the playoffs?
Right.
Just the Bills. Okay. I think ultimately the Patriots and Dolphins will be 2 teams jockeying for the wild card, and I would bet on the Patriots being right in the competition. I guess I'm getting a little too hyped up about minicamp, but I just was like so impressed with Mac Jones that I was like, okay, I've been setting this expectation that like if the Patriots want to make the playoffs, Mac has to be huge. And like I saw that at minicamp. I was like, wow, that was incredibly impressive for a year 2 quarterback. He's doing all of the things that I say he needs to do for them to get there. So I think the Patriots are going to be right there with a lot of the other wildcard teams. It's just such a competitive division.
Right.
I mean, if Deshaun Watson plays any football this year, and I mean, I know this is, I'm just rooting that he doesn't, because I think when he's surrounded with that much controversy, I feel like the NFL needs to make the right decision and suspend him maybe for a whole year. But there are other teams that are like right on the cusp of playoffdom. I mean, look at the Colts, look at the Ravens, look at the entire AFC West. It's just like one good team after another. And the Patriots might be like the 13th or 12th best team, maybe 11th best team in that conference. And there's only 7 playoff spots.
Yeah, so the Patriots will be coming to Arizona on a Monday night in Week 14 after the Cardinals have their bye. I'm not looking for a prediction because that's dumb at this point. But if you're comparing rosters from afar, how do Patriots fans view that game against the Cardinals as 2 fairly evenly matched teams, as a game that would be a steal, a game that they could steal a win, or one that they expect to win?
Steal, for sure. We'd have to steal this win. I think that the Cardinals are just a more talented team than the Patriots are. So it's a question of coaching. How much can the Patriots maximize the talent that they have on their roster this year? So you're betting on Belichick this year. I mean, Belichick is really betting on himself and Mac Jones. And like Mac Jones is going to be a product of how much Belichick can develop him. So I think ultimately the Cardinals are better built and more talented. And so if the Patriots go in there and get a win, they're going to be happy about it.
All right. That is Henry McKenna from PatriotsWire.com, our managing editor over there, a guy who's been with USA Today Wire for quite some time, been on the show a couple times over the last 3 years. Aside from the site there at Patriots Wire, Henry, where else can we find your work?
Yeah, give me a follow on Twitter. You can just search Henry McKenna or search @McKenna Analysis. That's my handle. And give me that click on the follow button.
Absolutely. Again, that's Henry McKenna from PatriotsWire.com. Thank you so much for coming on. And this will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk, episode 364. This is the end of our opponent previews for the Cardinals in the 2022 season. Beginning next week, Seth will be back with me as we get ready for the season. Coming up on our next show will be our NFC West ranking show, and depending on when the contract happens with Kyler Murray, we'll have a show about that, or we're included in the show. And then in 2 weeks, on the start of training camp, we will do the training camp preview. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.